Good morning. I am here with Taylor Sweeting. Taylor Sweeting, I met him through a friend of a friend, and that's how friends meet. Seems like that's how we make connections. Back in April, with the help of the Lord and turn of events, I started a social skills group for highly functional autistic young men. These are really not children, but they're young men anywhere between the ages of 20 and 35. My son is highly functioning autistic, and they call that Asperger's, or they did in 1994. And what that means is Hans Asperger and discovered this syndrome, Asperger's syndrome. I don't even know what year it was, but I know in the 1980s, because he was in Germany, Nazi Germany, they rediscovered his studies in a pile of papers. And so for 10, 12 years, they pored over it, and he was actually working with Asperger's syndrome. So they call it Asperger's syndrome after him, Hans Asperger's. So that was when in 1994 was when it got introduced to the mainstream. And that is when we started to begin to understand some of these children. And so, yeah, and I've had a lifetime experience because I live with a young man who has Asperger's. And we started this social group, and really the group is mainly for just guys to get together and talk, play games, do whatever they want to do. It's a social time because a lot of these kids really want friends, or I should say young men want friends desperately, but they don't know how to get the group together, or maybe they don't know. A lot of times they just need a little guidance there in how to connect. So that's what we do. We get together every Tuesday, and we eat and we talk, and we're developing relationships, and it's helping the communication. And there's no pressure really. There's nothing that we're doing that's anything different other than just socializing. Mm-hmm. So everybody loves it, and that's how I met Taylor, because I met him through a friend. So I'm going to introduce Taylor to you because Taylor is an educator, and he's just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to, he's highly functioning Asperger's. He's a highly educated man, and he just is just a wealth of knowledge. And I'm just jaw dropped when I talk with Taylor because he's just so full of knowledge. You're welcome. Very sweet, good-hearted young man, and so I want to introduce you to him. He's an autistic activist. He promotes disability awareness. He's a disability awareness advocate also. He is getting his master's towards human development counseling, which I love, which everybody can use, not just Asperger kids. He's got his bachelor's in social work, and he has 2 jobs. He works for the Chatham School District in education, and he also works in Jacksonville, Illinois Center for Independent Living. He's an advocate there I'm stuttering. And he also runs a disability support group for those types of people?
For different groups of people with disabilities, people who are with visual impairment or blind, hard of hearing, deaf. Mm-hmm. I work with people with epilepsy, people with different physical conditions, mobility, disabilities, all of them under the umbrella.
Well, what drew you towards this type of work?
I remember when I was younger, I always felt like there was something that was separating me from my peers. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know necessarily to what extent it was, but I just knew that the way they reacted to things and the way they did things was different than what I did. And rather than just dismiss that or think, oh, well, there's nothing, different about me, or there obviously is something different about them, I just kind of looked into it on my own and asked questions. And when I was 12 is when I was first told that I had autism. And I didn't know what that was. So I at first I thought, okay, well, how did I catch this? What happened? And, I kept asking questions. And eventually I learned that autism is just something that you're born with, and it helps you see the world differently.
Yes.
And rather than, oh, woe is me, or oh, this is terrible, I wanted to find a way to celebrate that, because to me, nothing was necessarily wrong or bad, because it's just the way I saw things. And that's what I want to do as a disability advocate is, we view disabilities from a first person's perspective. When we're born with a disability, or when we develop one and later in life and we've lived with it for so long, it doesn't become a disability anymore. It just becomes a way of life.
Okay.
It's from a third person's perspective that we can label it as a disability, because we see it and we think, I don't know how you're doing this. Like, or, oh my gosh, you're such an inspiration, you're this, and I couldn't begin to live with what you're living with. And I feel like, part of what makes disability so inspirational is that even despite, living with them, it becomes a way of life. And that's what I want people to see and view disabilities as, is it's a part of who we are. And rather, it's not something that's holding us back, but rather it's just giving us a different path to take to get to where we need to be.
Very good. Very good. So there's a couple things I want you to talk about. One of the stories I love that you tell is when you were on the playground. And so tell that story and what you and your mom talked about.
So when I was 7 or 8, maybe I was a little bit younger than that, I was coming home from school and I had bruises and, just scrapes and stuff like from on the playground. And I'd come home and I would take care of them. I'd wash them. I'd put a Band-Aid on, all the things. And Mom was getting really frustrated because she goes, why are you coming home with nothing, like a Band-Aid or, Neosporin? There's nothing. And she was getting really frustrated. And finally I said to her, well, why would I waste my time going to tell an adult that I'm hurt when I can take care of it perfectly myself? And whereas she was, well, okay, you got a point. She goes, you need to tell someone you're hurt. And so she really, tried to, drill that in my head for longest time. And we were going back and forth and back and forth. Finally, one day she sat me down and she said, Taylor, what do other kids do when they get hurt? And I stopped and I thought about it for a second, and I thought, they usually cry. They usually, tell somebody, or, and they make a fuss about it until someone comes and helps them, right? And she, I told her that, and she goes, well, did you ever think about doing that? And I thought, what do you mean by that? And she goes, try doing what the other kids do. She goes, you don't have to necessarily do it out of complete sincerity, but you just need to kind of mimic what they're doing. So I thought, okay. So the next time I got hurt on the playground, I remember I was sitting on the ground and I looked at my knee, and on my knee there was just a little scrape with a little bit of blood, and I thought, okay, here's my chance. So I sat there and I thought for a second. I was like, okay, what do I have to do? So I started welling up some tears in my eyes, and I was really working those tears out. And then I started, kind of blubbering a little bit, like, and I was like, okay, this is what kids do, right? So I'm really trying to play up the drama. There were kids running to the recess monitor like, Taylor never cries, so he must be really hurt, right? So here comes the recess monitor. Next thing you know, here comes the principal, here comes the nurse, here comes the secretary. Everyone and their mom is coming, like, oh my gosh, poor Taylor. So I remember they took me into the nurse's office. And they're sitting there, they're putting, they're cleaning up my cut. They put a Band-Aid on it. They gave me a sucker. And I'm sitting there eating my sucker, still cranking out some tears, for the act. And I was thinking in my head, I'm going, this is what it is. As someone who is autistic, I didn't know I was autistic at the time, but I thought, this must be how people do it. They don't actually do this out of sincerity. They're doing this because this is just the way you do it. And when I figured out that I was autistic, I realized this is part of being, this is part of living with that, is you learn to become an actor or an actress. And you have to play neurotypical in an atypical mind. It's not always easy, but it's so interesting to sit back and watch people's interactions, how they interact with each other, what their reactions are, and trying to mimic that in a way that you can be not necessarily just like them, but that you can pass in their minds as being, okay, well, there's nothing different about you. Not saying that you don't want that to be, something that you want to be known as, but when they look at you, they don't go, well, what's wrong with you? It's, no, I can play the game. I can do this.
Yeah. I love that story because like you say, autism, they see the world differently. Their brains are wired differently. Mm-hmm. And like, for example, I'm trying to think of something, sometimes, well, one of the things I want to talk about is just the nonverbal. Anyway, thank you for sharing that story. That is amazing. I love that story every time you tell it. It's so great. But also, autism is also defined as nonverbal. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the way I'm going to, my son is highly functioning autistic. And so I'm going to explain my perspective because I grew up with him. So I'm going to explain my perspective, and Taylor is going to explain his perspective as being someone who lives with it. It's just two different perspectives. Mm-hmm. Because I can sit back and observe, because I've watched Austin. So I can sit back and observe and pick up on things that he cannot because he doesn't see the world the same. Mm-hmm. So basically what nonverbal language means to me is that an autistic child, they cannot read nonverbal language. So 90% of language is unspoken. When I walk into a room with my friends, you just kind of go around, you read the room. Expressions on people's faces, this, that, body language, you just read the room. And Austin cannot do that. So if somebody doesn't speak to Austin and say, hey, hi, Austin, he'll say to me, that person doesn't like me. And and so we've had many discussions about this because it seems like you have to explain the obvious to them. Like what's obvious to me is not obvious to Austin, so I will have to verbally tell him, no, this is what this means. Or when they said this is what they meant. And he goes, wow, I just didn't see that, So a lot of times, we take so much for granted. In our neurotypical brains, we take so much for granted. Whereas the autistic person needs to have everything really explained to them, and now I forget that. Even though I grew up with my son, I still sometimes forget that he needs an explanation for the things that I think he should automatically know. So it's just a learning curve, really, all through life. But Austin and I have a really good rapport, and when Taylor came into the group and came into the picture, he just has a wonderful way of also explaining his perspective. So I kind of want you to talk about nonverbal language, and I think You talked about a situation one time at work. I don't know if you want to name names, but just a scenario of how you perceived somebody's communication or somebody's and maybe that's going to help people communicate better. And if you see somebody different, if you see somebody different, it's because their brain is wired different than yours. I mean, I can spot that a mile away now, and it's I don't know, it warms my heart because I want to go up to to this person or stranger, and just talk to them and make them feel seen and valued and heard, because sometimes they just feel completely invisible. So
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, nonverbal language is a very deep subject because, I mean, you're right. I mean, most language that we communicate is nonverbal. And I think one of the disconnects that, creates that awkward situation or that awkward interaction is I don't always pick up on those cues. I'm going into the professional realm and going into, into jobs and into school and everywhere. I'm very upfront. I'm like, you need to tell me what's up, or you need to tell me how you're feeling, what you're feeling, when you're feeling it, and if it's important to me, I need to know.
yeah,
Because I don't pick up on that subtle, okay, here's an important thing to know, or, oh, well, this is how I'm feeling. I'm not going to pick up on that. But if you tell me this is what it is, okay.
perfect example. Yeah, perfect example.
I know, it's funny, when I was in college, I told that to all my professors. I said, I realize part of the curriculum here is to get you to think independently and to feel like you can make, your own assumptions of what's important, what's not important, and how I need to do this. But you need to tell me when something is important. Like if this is something that I need to write down, or this is something I need to note. And it's so funny because everyone that was in classes with me were like, thank you. Because they would say, this is important, and it was meant for me, but everyone else was like, oh my gosh, thank you. And they're like, writing things down. But
That's so good.
yeah, and I just feel like, a big part of my life has always been learning how to, I guess, be upfront with people about it. I think if there's one thing I'll talk about when it comes to being an advocate is I'm a self-advocate first. Because in order to advocate for others, I first have to be able to meet my needs. And part of my needs are when I walk into a place, whether it's a business, a learning setting or a work setting, anything, a social setting, I have to explain to people this is what I need. And for me, it's in the beginning, it's always really hard because, try to tell someone, I don't get your social cues. And because, then people, they get offended. They're like, well, what? Am I not being upfront enough? And I want to be like, no, you're not. Otherwise, I wouldn't be saying something. But I've also noticed that I'm the kind of person that when you tell me something, I will take it, for it 100%. Like, I will take it for what it is. So sarcasm is not easy for me to digest.
Yeah.
I can appreciate the sarcasm when someone says it's sarcasm. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. But I'm very much like, if you're gonna joke, you need to tell me it's a joke.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'm totally fine. So, but yeah, one thing I will definitely also say about nonverbal communication is, for me, my nonverbal communication, I feel like is also kind of the way I expect it from everyone else. I'm terrible when it comes to things like trying to necessarily tell a joke or being sarcastic or using nonverbal language. I'm terrible at that. So what I do is I tell people I'm being sarcastic, and then I say my sarcastic comment, and they're like, "Okay,"
I'm
like, great. I was like, we're all on the same page. But I feel like sometimes it's one of those, I don't want to say it's a downer. That's not the word. I think it's more of like one of those social deflating. Like you're kind of deflating the balloon. Like I'll be like, "Here's a joke," and I'll blah 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 blah, and then I'll be like, "Now this is the part where you laugh," and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then they laugh, and I'm like, "There it is." Okay, Whereas most people will say, "Oh, blah 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 blah," and then they get this natural reaction. So sometimes it's like, how do I do that? And so that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm not trying to, say, oh my gosh, I'm so advanced in this. But don't be discouraged when it comes to your child learning new skills like that, or trying to understand nonverbal language or develop their own, because it's not easy. And you're going to be in a situation sometimes where you feel like, oh my gosh, will my child ever learn this? Will they ever? They will. They will, trust me on that. But it's still taking me time. And God love people that are around me. Sometimes they're like, oh, you slipped up again. Or, oh, well, there it is again. I'm like, sorry. Okay, no. Okay, back up. And then I redo, But sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and I love the part where you talked about being an advocate for yourself. And that is part of what you educate young children in school. To speak up and to advocate for themselves. I mean, really, even if you're neurotypical, we need to stand up for ourselves. We need to say to another child, I don't like that. Or, instead of being passive, we need to, not necessarily have to be mean, but, speaking out and saying, I don't like that. Can you please stop that?
Right.
Or, because otherwise, they're going to continue to do it. And sometimes they just need to know you don't like it. And so I taught preschool. So there was one thing that we did in the classroom, and it was amazing to me how it worked. It was 3 and 4 year olds, and we used to say, if a little kid went up and hit somebody or grabbed a toy or something that kids do, usually it's not so much as grab a toy, it's like pushing somebody or getting, So I would go up to the child who was pushed, and I would ask them a question. I would say, did you like that? They said, no. I said, well, you need to tell Johnny that you didn't like that. And he says, I don't like that. And then I talked to Johnny, and I say, Johnny, was that helpful or was that hurtful? Say it was hurtful. They always know what they did was hurtful. A lot of times, there's inner reasons why they do it, but it's just a matter of getting them to asking the questions and getting them to think and solve their own problems, even at an early age, will get the child to start thinking critically. Was that helpful or hurtful? That's a very simple thing to say, really to an adult.
Yeah.
If they've never been trained to think about what they're doing, it's a powerful statement. Because then you're thinking to yourself, why did I do that?
Yeah.
So anyway, that was one of the things we did in preschool. It's called conscious discipline, and it was a, can you scoot over here a little bit? It was a powerful tool that we used in our disciplinary classroom, and nobody was yelling. We didn't have to yell or scream or say stop or no. We approached the child and got them to think about what they just did, and it was really a powerful tool. Just one simple thing like that.
And it's important, I think, also to not only, I think, point out not only how it made you feel, but really, I think, asking yourself, was there another way that this could have been done?
Oh, I love that too. Yes, definitely.
It's not condemning. It's not saying, well, you did wrong. It's, you did it this way. Did it get you the result you wanted? And, if the answer is yes, it's like, okay. But you also stated that you knew that it wasn't appropriate. So how can you get that same result with a different, process? And I think it's about it's all about educating. I always explain autism like it's a brand new computer, but they didn't send the instructions.
Yeah.
So you're like most people, like most parents. I know people will be like, "No, that's not the case at all." Most parents have a general idea of how to raise their neurotypical child, or at least have an idea. Okay, this is what worked with my last child, or this is what I've learned, or this is what I've been told, and they kind of use that as a template to kind of create a process of raising. When you have a child with autism, it doesn't always work that way. So you have to come up with different ways to get your point across. And I think part of that is breaking things down into simple ideas and simple realities. That it's because again, you're looking at a complicated system that has just been handed to you, and you don't have the instructions.
Oh, so true.
So you're trying to come up with an idea of this is how this is going to work. This is how this is going to work. And now you have to find ways to communicate that to them, not just, effectively, but respectfully.
Yes. We are going to have weekly interviews with Taylor because this is a subject that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. It's a much misunderstood subject. I know Austin, made mistakes in the way that he wanted to communicate when he was growing up in school, but he was also sorely misunderstood because I knew why he did it, but nobody else did. And even when I would speak to the teachers, it's just so foreign to be able to implement these strategies when you haven't seen it before and when you don't understand it. It is. It's been a journey, and it's still a journey, but it is a beautiful journey because it's created a lot of empathy in my heart for these young men. It's helping me understand them just a little bit better. So anyway, we're gonna close out, and we're gonna revisit this subject. If there is a subject matter or that you would like for Taylor to talk about, he's an educator. He is so very good at explaining autism and giving examples that please drop in the messages what you would like, a subject that you'd like for him to cover, and we're just gonna do this about once a week. So we just want to thank you for watching. Thank you, Taylor, so much for taking your time and pouring your heart out and being transparent because that's what people can relate to.
And that's what we should do.
That's what I
want to do as an advocate. So absolutely.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. And I'm going to press this little